All right. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Oh, I'm so excited to be here with our guest today. So, right now, I am looking at the beautiful face of Alexandra Durrigan, who is a dear sister of mine. And it is just such a blessing to have her here on the podcast to share her wisdom. So, Ali and I met at a training in Ashland. I'm going to give a little backstory here. And we had the sweet privilege of being able to be roomies together for about a week. Was it a week or maybe 10 days of
Yeah.
deep pelvic learning and integration? And so not only am I like such a yeah, just so in awe of the work that you do, like getting to live with you and getting to, our sweet little mornings on the porches, just musing about life, was such a beautiful moment in my life. So I want to just welcome you, Ali, to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here.
Same, babe. Same. I know. It was a dream. We had a dream time together. And it's
Really.
so meaningful to me because, I was reflecting on it this morning as we were getting ready to sit down. And you're just one of those women who's come into my life. And every time we talk and every time we drop in, it's just like I saw you yesterday and we were making bread. It's just so kindred and I cherish you. And so, yeah, thanks for having me here.
Likewise, likewise.
Yeah.
Well, Ali, I wonder if you would introduce yourself and the beautiful work that you do in the world. I would love to hear it in your words and how it's moving through you today in this moment.
Okay. Um, so yeah, my name is Alexandra Durgan. I also can go by Ali by my dear sisters, and that's really sweet for me. And yeah, I began my journey as a registered nurse and was working on the women's specialty unit, doing labor and delivery, postpartum care, and ultimately the breadth of that care was reproductive surgeries. And so when I wanted to go help women, nursing was a natural step. And then I was just really faced with the reality of the Western medical system of allopathy and what care looks like in that model. And I really wanted to be a part of something more. And it became a prayer. I began to seek, I began to ask questions. And ultimately, it led me into this beautiful world that we share together of womb health and pelvic care. And my work today is really rested in whole woman, whole pelvic care. Just honoring the continuum of the body and every aspect of the body as inseparable from the whole. And I really have a passion for listening to the cosmology of the tissues and a woman's whole story in the way that her lived life, her matriarchy, her belief systems, her experiences are indwelling in the tissues. And, I think a lot of people in the holistic realms understand symptom more as story. And I really feel devoted to listening to the stories of women's bodies and what's actually possible in the arrangement of health when we are able to be held in a way where our bodies can rest again, where our bodies can find healing, and where we can really steep into the vitality that our life-giving bodies are capable of. So my work in the world right now is hands-on multi-day ceremonial care with women. And then I'm teaching my practitioner training program and just so excited for the way that this work will continue to grow and to move through other keepers and medicine women. And yeah, I think that's the breadth of it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thanks for arriving here. Thanks for giving us, like, I know it's just like the sweetest little nugget of you and how you've arrived here. And one of the things that I just find so fascinating about your story is that you really emerged from the world of allopathic medicine. And I know you were working in a pretty prestigious hospital. And so your body of work now, as its known origin, pelvic care, like I love to just think of the sort of almost like stepping backwards in time that you've done from like beginning with allopathic medicine and what you shared about really allopathic women's health care being surgery mostly, right? Pelvic surgeries. And what has that taken for you to kind of like step back through the origin and the storyline of women's health? Tell us a little bit about that.
Wow, babe, thanks for that question. Um, yeah, oh, that just touches me so deeply. Yeah, when I was a nurse, I mean, even in nursing school, I was a little rogue, honestly. I kind of took the hippie template pretty early on. And I just started asking questions. And those questions couldn't be answered. How did a woman get to the place where she needs a hysterectomy? Why are we, surprised when a woman wants to birth naturally and is refusing an epidural? Why are we sending women home with C-section scars and no follow-up care when women are receiving, ovarian removals, oophorectomies, hysterectomies, their uterus is being removed? What is the aftercare? There's no aftercare. I would listen to the stories of these women and they would tell me things like, I've lived my whole life in pain. The pharmaceuticals stopped working. I can't wait for my uterus to be out of my body. And it really just struck a chord in my heart, and it didn't make sense. And I really attribute my own journey to my capacity to be curious in those moments, which was that I had been completely disassociated from my feminine physiology. I had an 8-year eating disorder that led me to hospitalization. And it was in my healing of that that I really claimed and started to own, like, as a woman, I want to love this body. As a woman, I want to know what it is to feel safe in this body. As a woman, like, where do we get to know what true wellness is? And so in my own personal journey of that, I was lensing my sight as a nurse and in another way that really allowed these questions to be asked. And so, the questions of how did we get here? What is the greater care for women? How do we prevent this from happening in the first place? Like, why is reproductive surgeries a multi-billion-dollar industry? Those questions couldn't be asked. And my nursing school training was rigorous and we looked often at upstream approaches. So to me, it became, I was like, well, my natural next question is how do we go upstream? And I started to really research, like, what is the history of gynecology? How did we get these care practices? And there's a huge grave history there, which is really that allopathy was birthed and formated. Modern gynecology was birthed and formated after this mass period of time, which was the witch trials, which was the overturn from matriarchy to patriarchy, which was where women could no longer hold power and have medicine practices, which was where women were shunned and their lives were very seriously threatened. The Malefius Maleficarum is, a book that was ruling for over 300 years that said there's no greater threat to the church than midwives. And at that time, it was believed by church and government became very intimate, that only the priests could be having conversations of God, only priests could receive the word of God. And so this deep body of what I call original women's keeping, where medicine women would go to homes and caretake women and children, where women's practices, we can go way back to deep Sumeria. We had these temple ritual goddess arts, the priestesses knew anointing practices. People and tribes knew that the fertility of humanity, the fertility of their communities, of their villages, was the fertility of their women. All of this has a long history of being lost and overturned. And in that loss of wisdom and knowledge, we then have the dawn of allopathy. And allopathy began with the practice of scientific experiments on the bodies of women, led by Dr. James Sims, who was a man. and only men could practice medicine. So we just have to understand, and I've come to understand through this historical exploration that there was a time where women and the womb and the bodies of women were revered, where women's fertility was valued and respected. We had deep herbal and hands-on tending through midwives and medicine keepers in communities, and that was majorly lost. And now we've turned to allopathy. And, I can be frustrated with allopathy, and then I can also have compassion because in the grave loss of all of this wisdom, in the grave loss of valuing women, in the grave loss of the womb being the origin, of women being seated at the center, of nourishing people through the nourishment of women and birth and fertility and sexuality, like we all lost touch with something very sacred. And allopathy just doesn't have the intellect, the knowledge, and maybe even the desire to caretake for women in a different way. So then we can kind of exhale into that. And, for me, another part of allopathy is like in allopathy's origin, it really was created to be life-saving. It was meant to have this acute care response to these life-threatening things. But our womanhood is not life-threatening, right? So we need an entirely different care structure to nourish the bodies of women throughout their lives. And so, yeah, I began to find womb care and pelvic care and all of these more traditional practices, and then also started to look for where are the gaps? What else can we fill in here? How are we still caring for the body of women, even in holistic places where sexuality is still severed from our care? How are we just touching the womb or just touching internally? Why are we not taking care of the vulva? I just kept asking questions and really weaving together a body of work that is my prayer for women.
Mm. Oh my gosh. I like teared up and got goosebumps many times throughout what you just spoke to because there is such a deep felt sense of A, like grief of the loss, and B, hope of the reweaving, like the deep medicine and sort of the falling apart that has needed to happen for now, like this reweaving of whole woman, whole body, whole pelvic care to kind of come back online in this really powerful way. Um, and yeah, I find, that many women arrive at my table, having gone through the ringer
Yeah.
of allopathy and, having arrived like, this is my last stop before I get my uterus removed. This is my last stop before I just like throw in the towel. And so to sort of have that, um, yeah, to be asking those questions, like, what is happening upstream of arriving at the decision to remove, the parts and to remove these like vital pieces of our bodies. And so I am so grateful that you're asking these questions. I'm right there with you, honey. And like, yeah, that we're starting to come to like, I feel like this deep remembered, like embodied remembrance of an old, old time when that was alive and it was here. And so you spoke to something I find really powerful because I think sometimes there can be this kind of, good or bad, black or white, holistic, allopathic. And like what you just spoke to just now is like they're almost like two different paradigms, right? That allopathic medicine has its place in life-saving circumstances. I certainly like had I not had the skilled surgeons when I had an appendicitis, for example, I wouldn't be here speaking today. And so there's like a place for that. And I see that. And at the same time, like how do we sort of remember and reweave
Mhm.
everything else that isn't that? Because we've really lost, like we're really good at putting out the fires, but we're
Mhm.
not good at not starting them in the first place,
Right.
And so I would love to hear a little bit more about like what does whole woman care mean to you and how does it sort of prevent a person ending up in a like life-saving, last resort kind of situation, like we see so much in our practices.
Totally. Yeah. I think something that we both hold is that we're creating this consciousness of, hey, woman, you matter, right? Of mothers matter, your breasts matter, your belly matters, your womb matters, your vulva matters. Like you are worthy of care, A, and then B, another quality and depth of care exists. I see those as kind of the first two kind of points of tending this cycle and also tending our psychological relationship to ourselves as women, which is, oh, my body matters. There is value in this vessel, and I am worthy of being cared for. And then in that, there's an entirely other paradigm of nourishment that can tend and caretake my body as a woman, which for me is really the whole woman, whole pelvic care. And there's these pillars of my work that continue to refine themselves, which is also that there's never a time that our bodies as women are not worthy and deserving of being cared for. Whether it's just a young girl learning how to touch her womb, whether before or at the start of her bleed, of her journey into womanhood, prenatal care, fertility care, conception care, like the birthing gateways being well, just general pelvic and whole woman wellness for the health of our menstrual cycle, knowing that we as women have inherent rhythms in our bodies, and in a linear world, we've lost touch with that. We've lost track with that our womb teaches us what it is to live in relationship to the cycles of life and our very nature of life, death, and rebirth. How do our cycles inform us how to pause, how to rest, how to let go, how to replenish? It's like we're starting to really weave back what it is to be a woman. And we get to be informed by the very high intelligence of our bodies. And so for me, whole woman, whole pelvic care is the inclusion of sexual health as whole health, the inclusion of the biological pace of our tissues, meaning slow care that allows us to really rest and restore in our nervous system, where healing is actually enabled, what it is to be in relationship to our rhythms, which is also slower, more nutritive living. And when we're down regulated, when we feel that sense of rhythm in our lives, we're not running, exhausted in these perpetual stress cycles, which lead to an enormity of dis-ease and symptom in our bodies, but rather we're rested in ourselves. And then even physiologically in that, our blood flow internally is going back to our reproductive spaces, feeding our womb, feeding our ovaries, feeding our yonis, feeding our reproductive health. So when we're guided by our feminine physiology, our life begins to replenish itself. And again, these aspects of, the biological pace of our tissues, slowness in time and rhythmic care, tending our nervous system, not leaving any aspects of our body out, including our sexuality, including our pleasure, including our desires, including how we feel safe and fortified in the width and breadth of our hips. How are we cared for prenatally? How are we intact to our birthing gateways? How are we soft and nourished in our bellies? How do we birth? How are we tended in our birthing canals postpartum? How do we just rest within ourselves? And how intact are we to the truth and wisdom of our tissues as guiding points to make choices in our lives with women? That's the whole woman lens for me, is that this work and being intact to our tissues and balanced in our whole bodies and balanced in our whole pelvises, balanced in our vulva, yoni, cervix, womb, it's like now we're living from not just health in our bodies, but in our true form as women. And when women are intact to their bodies this way, when women are intact to their wombs in this way, we're making very different choices in our lives. We're making very different choices in our relationships. We're making very different choices in our motherhood. We're believing in ourselves different ways. So, it's whole woman because it is whole woman. It's whole life, right? And I know you really feel connected to that as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. I mean, yeah, there was so much that you said here that I resonated with. And the idea that, so often what brings women to my table, and I'm sure I would imagine to your table as well, is dis-ease or symptomology of some sort, right? That's so often what brings a woman to this work. And then what is revealed is that it's so much deeper than resolving the symptom, or that the root or the origin of the symptom is embedded and encoded in ancestral healing and in nervous system healing. I mean, part of what I love, I mean, this is part of the reason why I offer my sessions in such long formats, and I know you do as well. It interrupts the script of like, this is what healthcare looks like. It looks like a billable hour. It looks like you get in, you get out.
Yeah.
Even just inviting a woman to be like, we are going to be with your body for 6 hours. Imagine you're going to be nourished. You're going to have time to rest. Like you taking an hour to just rest and put your feet on the ground mid-session is actually as important a part of it as all of the hands-on work that we may or may not be doing. And so to me, like that's also this sort of it lives within the definition of whole woman care, is like it's not just what we're doing, but it's what we're not doing. It's not just like what is happening in the session, but it's like what's not happening in the session. What's not happening is like rushing and pathologizing and the sort of fitting or like shoving a woman's like symptoms into these little pigeonholes. So
Totally.
I love that.
Yeah.
One of one of the things that you speak to and that I'd love to sort of invite you to speak deeper on is the question of language and how important language is to sort of the yeah, this understanding of like where we are sort of in the global womb history, like where we are in our lineage, but also
Yeah.
like how we relate to our bodies. And I can, I've explored and experimented with using all different sorts of language. I mean, if you look at any textbook about the female pelvis, it is fraught territory when it comes to like what to call things, whose name gets to be where, like there's so much there's just you can tell that it's been sort of like this battleground and just how things are named and just how things are like labeled. And so I would love to hear. I mean, I've in with my own biology, I've like experimented with like how does it feel to say like pelvis or pussy or vagina or yoni, like, and each one like brings such a different sort of invocation. And so I would love to just invite you to share a little bit more about language.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, babe. Yeah, language is so powerful. And I love that you just said pussy because pussy's like such a journey for us as women, is it not? I mean, I can even remember where I was like, you know, yeah, I love my body, but I'm never gonna say pussy. Like that feels, bad, wrong. And the thing is that I really find we're at such a loss of language for our bodies as women. We don't have language currently in mass culture where women's care has its own embodied, cultural context of nourishment. Like the current language paradigm for women's health, and I'm gonna kind of specifically lens it into Western allopathy, is like sterility. And then there's no language, very like so often women are like, I was never told about my menstrual cycle. I was never told that my womb has a physiologic position, which is center. I was never told about my engorgement pathways. What even is engorgement? Engorgement is the filling of blood. It's our erectile networks throughout our vulva and our sexual spaces, and it's how our tissues drink, and it's how they lubricate, and it's how they communicate, and it's how they express their fertility and are watered into health and vitality. We've lost language, so we have this massive severance of how to even understand and relate to our bodies as women. So, I'm really passionate about re-languaging anatomy, re-languaging what's possible in women's care, re-languaging that whole woman, whole pelvic care exists, where you get to arrive in this depth and width of care where every part of your body, from back body to neck to breast to chest to diaphragm to belly to womb to uterine ligaments to vulva to yoni to cervix, gets to be cared for. That, oh, now in my consciousness as a woman, I've seen the words care and cervix together. I've seen the words care and vulva together. I've seen the words womb and care and reverence and power together. We have not seen the weaving of respect and value, of care and nourishment with the anatomical landmarks of our feminine physiology. I've definitely had women comment on my things before and be like, I literally don't know what you're saying. You're saying birth continuum. What does that mean? Okay, that means this huge journey of time and transformation from the conception of your child throughout your pregnancy, within your birthing ceremony, in the postpartum time, into motherhood, and then ultimately beyond. And then what is the care that we get to receive in the birth continuum? What is the care, the hands-on touch and tending that your body throughout that whole spectrum of your experience gets to receive? So our awareness widens from this lens of sterility of a very limited form of language, which is honestly birth control and gynecologist, to ceremony, respect, reverence, nourishment, fertility, vitality. We start pairing these wider descriptives, words that we then get to bridge into our anatomy, and we start to understand an entirely new realm of care and possibility for our lives and bodies as women. So yeah, to just weave it all back, we're really relanguaging this work by relanguaging womanhood and women's care and expanding the language of it.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I can relate so much to the power of language, especially when it comes to speaking to our own bodies. And I think we're really, so my sort of coming of age as a mother, I don't know if you know this or if I've told you this part of my story, but I was living in Peru at the time and gave birth to my first son in Peru. And so all of the language that I used around what was happening in my body, around my body, the parts of my body around the birth process was all in Spanish, which is such a different experience. I mean, the words for giving birth in Spanish is dar a luz, which is to give light. And so
Oh,
even just that understanding of like what was about to happen was completely different. And I speak to this often, like what it felt like to sort of prepare for birth in a culture who their entheogenic practices are still really intact. So the idea of like expanding out beyond your body into like deep journey space is like kind of just every day. Like it's something that is still very much woven into like the tapestry of the storytelling and the way that people just move through their life. So preparing for birth, which is such a, expansive, really entheogenic experience within a culture where it wasn't necessarily being like planted right into the sort of sterile gynecological
right.
paradigm. It was really, for at least in with the midwives that I was working with and the experience that I was having, I want to say like there's certainly all of that there as well. Was such a different experience and such a different paradigm. I mean, my sort of birth preparation, we were using language like journey, we were using language like expansion. So often, so my sort of step onto this path in pelvic care really came through the midwifery and doula space. And what I was finding was, here I was like sitting with these women who are preparing for birth and had never even been able to say vagina without cringing. And here they are about to have this like incredibly vagina-centric experience. They've never
Totally.
looked at themselves, they've never touched themselves. The only touch they've ever received has either been, from a doctor or from a partner. They don't even know sort of what their tissues can do in terms of engorgement or expansion or like what's where. And then all of a sudden it's like you have, 9 months if you're lucky to sort of prepare for like this huge rite of passage. It's about to happen in this part of your body that you'd rather not think about or look at or talk about. So I just hear the power of language and women, needing to at least be able to, yeah, talk about these parts of their bodies. Yeah.
Totally. And I'm just being so moved. Can you say again? It meant the name for birth. It was the coming of life or the expansion into life. What did you say?
So dar a luz. So to give light. So light.
Might.
Mhm. Yeah.
Ah, I mean, immediately we're tying together in that the way my body experiences that language is, oh, birthing is bringing the light of something so sacred through me.
Mhm.
I'm immediately retouched and retapped into the sacredness of birth through that calling. I just, I love that, babe. And, it makes me so emotional because it's like, yeah, when we don't even have the names for our anatomy, when we don't even know how to call to these places or how to name what's happening in our bodies or to tell our experiences, what happens is we just disconnect from them. We start to pull back and pull away, and then it's like, not only am I not naming my vagina, I'm not thinking about it. Not only am I not naming my womb, I'm not thinking about it. And I can feel these really tender places, that women arrive into these vulnerable, containers because they have that internal desire to want something more. But then even sometimes we don't even have the language to ask and inquire
Right.
about something more.
Yeah.
And so, it's like culturally, the more that we get to speak to this and your birthing experience to me as a tribute to that, when it's steeped into just embodied relationship to life, when you're calling to the birthing of light, you've absorbed that since you're a little girl, if you're in that culture, or in that community, or you're around that language. It's like when we re-language, we start to restory our experiences and our realities in a really transformative way. And when language is lost, particularly for our feminine bodies, it gets really sterile and it gets really disconnected to what's holy. And the sacred just is the feminine form. And I will never forget seeing the words sacred and sexuality together for the first time and how that impacted my capacity to reach into another potential for my body and my life. So I'm so with you, and what a living example in your story of what's possible for our almost osmosis in culture through the shifting of language alone.
Yeah. 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 I feel like there's so much more we could talk about in that regards. I mean, I'm a poet and a writer, and so language is just like so juicy for me, so juicy. Um, one of the things that you spoke to about like women knowing that there's something more, right? There's something more that they want. And I think not necessarily having the language for it, and then even maybe deeper than that is like not having the permission to want it, like not even thinking like, is it okay to want more? I mean, something that you say a lot is more for our womanhood. Is it okay to want more out of this? Like for whatever reason, we came down embodied in a woman's body. Like, is it okay to want more? Is it okay to know, like, what is it to be intimately connected to the moon? What is it to be a woman who, like, goes through this entire life rebirth cycle every month, embodied in our wombs? Like, what is that? And so I feel like not only is it about language, but it's about permission too. And it's about like, um, yeah, just presencing that it's okay to want more. It's okay to want to know more. It's okay to want to talk about your body. It's okay to want to like have, deeply reverent hands on your body. Yeah.
Yes. Ah, and I'm going to push us a little bit
Mhm.
because in honor of the times that we are in, it's not just okay, it's vital.
Yes.
It is vital that we start asking and wanting and getting curious about more for ourselves as women. It's truly vital to our health and the health of our children, our families, our lovemaking, and our communities and world at this time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to know that not only it's this kind of care is not a luxury,
Yeah.
it's not sort of a like cherry on top. Like it is deeply essential. And I think we're coming back into a time where we're starting to recognize that, where that's really been, pushed out, where allopathy really took the like this is medicine role. And I see that, I mean, maybe it's the little bubble that I'm in, but I see that starting to shift in a new way. And so, yeah, for anybody that's listening who's like, oh, well, this isn't for me, or I don't really have anything wrong with me, or there's no symptoms, or I don't experience pelvic pain, like this is still for you. This is still for you because just like you go to any other sort of body worker, just like you go to, receive a massage or receive acupuncture, or receive just like these health giving practices. I mean, internal pelvic work. And again, internal pelvic work is just one little piece of the entire whole woman care that we're talking about. We're like literally touching the place where it all comes together. There's been so many times on my table where like, women who've had like lower back pain that they just can't, like no massage will quite get there. And you touch the structures internally and you're like, that's it. That's the origin of it, but nobody will touch it. Like nobody will go to where it actually originates from. So again,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is not just like a luxury. It's a care practice. It's a health practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I say this really respectfully, because I revere, chiropractic, acupuncture, massage, body workers, like, I've got my team as well. And until we arrive at yoni and cervix and womb, and we really listen for their balance and alignment and wellness, we're kind of dancing around the majority of the, diseases, the issues, the pain points that we experience in our body. Like you said, the mysterious back pain, the menstrual cramps, the continued tension in the shoulders, the, limited breath patterns, the foot pain, the whatever, the sucked in belly, the irregular menstrual cycle, like whatever it is, the jaw pain. Until we're in those most internal places where we're kind of dancing around it, you know. Um, and I just think let's name them, let's own them, and let's give to these parts of ourselves in a really nutritive way. And I know that we both witness in our work, like when women are finally touched, when women finally start to self grant that permission that you were so beautifully talking about, which is an act of self-responsibility, I believe. We have to get curious and start wondering, can I be worthy and deserving of this? You and I echo the answer of yes. And then we have to take that self-responsible act of, okay, I'm going to actually explore what it is to have that, to invest in that, to be touched in that way. And it's like most women on my table are like, oh my God, weeping tears. I had no idea how badly I needed this, how much this part of me was impacting my life, how much I didn't actually feel home in my body, how little sensory intactness I actually had with myself. I didn't know how much I was yearning to be cared for in this untouched place. I didn't know my body could be cared for in this way. It transforms our entire orientation to ourselves and ultimately to our life when we receive and are restored in this quality and depth of care. So, even just as a woman, like you said, if you don't have a loud physical reason, like a cyst or a fibroid or a deep pelvic pain or, vulva pain or whatever, to come, what would it be as a woman to just be cared for?
Yeah. Yeah, that question still gives me goosebumps because, honestly, I'm still learning that for myself. Like this is something that I like live and breathe, and I'm
Continuously.
still continuously learning and still continuously learning like how to slow down when I'm bleeding, how to, not schedule work when I'm bleeding, how to like tend to my own like tender body. It's an ongoing process. Um, something that you mentioned that I feel like I had sort of put a little bookmark in that I want to come back to that's really important before we sort of begin to wind down here is the idea that even within the most holistic paradigms, there's still this way of like, okay, well, sexuality lives over here,
Mhm.
healing lives over here. And okay, we can either do like a healing session that's about like trauma and, pain, or we can do a pleasure session, but that's like, that doesn't really belong in like healing. That's like something else. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you've kind of either woven those together, whether it's in your practitioner training or in your own, hands-on work and what you've learned there in the sort of like reweaving of that split.
Totally. Yeah, we absolutely have to tend to that. That was one of the biggest things that I saw in allopathy is that, oh, we severed sexual health from whole health a long time ago. I mean, doctors, physicians, nurses are literally trained, even in L&D and in women's care, to not make it sexual, to literally not comment on sexuality. Sexuality has no place here. And I'll never forget the intensity of that teaching in nursing school. And then when I went out on the nursing unit and we're birthing through our sexual gateways, yet will not name the sexual nature of birth, that's a schism. Our nervous system is 100% aware of the lack of belongingness of these parts of us in that room. And that's going to majorly impact our felt sense of safety in ourselves, our felt sense of, capacity to be with and trust and feel and sense these parts of ourselves, to open to the beauty of these parts of ourselves. It is absolutely, I'm going to use an intense word, I think degrading to our health when we say sexuality can't belong in the room, because that actually means that our bodies can't belong in the room. So how can we heal and be in health if our bodies can't be in the room? From our earliest moments, we have these really tender sexual wounds. I mean, the women that I work with, all women, even women deeply empowered in their sexuality, there's still, even for myself, there's still threads of sexual dissonance and wounding that we've just picked up, whether from our own direct experiences or from, just the reality of being in society and culture that says our sexual bodies are not belonging. That is so painful. And so for me, one of the first tenets of my own care of origin has been sexual health as whole health. Our vulva, our yoni, our cervix, our womb, our ovaries, our G spot, our engorgement pathways are vital to our fertility, which is the foundation of our health. We are life-giving, sexual, procreative beings, and it must have a space of belonging in the room. And this is a foundation of the care that I serve. It's a foundation of my work. It's a prayer for health providing practices as a whole that I hold for our collective, and it's a huge part of what I teach in the Origin Pelvic Care Practitioner Training Program, because I will not stand for places that continue to sever our deepest nature, and where we can't come into wholeness and belongingness and really become intact to the miracles of health and potential that are possible in our bodies when sexuality is being taken out of the room. So I believe it's so important. I know that sexuality is a huge part of your work too. And I really just believe that this is a place we must tend. And as practitioners and women's keepers, this is our own internal, work that we have to do to really be able to own this and hold this, because we cannot offer whole woman care if the biggest part of her, which is her sexuality and her sexual body, can't be in the room, right?
So well said. So well said. And I would even go like one little step deeper. Like if our sexuality isn't the room, like the fact that we exist is not in
Totally.
the room. Like, how did we all get here?
Totally.
It's like deracinating the entire like way that we like emerge into this embodied form. So
Yes.
yeah, we can't sever that part out. And it's wild to me that the sort of field of women's sexual health has nothing to do with sex or
Yeah.
sexuality. It's like we keep sexuality outside of sexual health. It's like, how is that? How
How
is
is that healing?
that?
Yeah. And you know what else I see it does is it removes us from what's sacred, because sexuality is life-giving.
Yeah.
You said, and it's our procreative life-giving nature, which is so sacred. It's so holy. And
Yeah.
so to arrive in presence to that and to bring reverence into the space, now we're not just intact to our bodies, but we're intact to life.
Hmm.
And that really,
Full circle, baby. Yeah. So I know that you are pouring like all of this wisdom. You are pouring your entire life's work into your training program right now. Would you speak a little bit about that?
oh, sure.
I,
Um,
I just love
uh,
hearing you talk about it because of the
oh,
face lights up. So I want you to
oh,
talk about it here.
so, yeah, we are in month 10/11 of the 2024 cohort, the first inaugural cohort of the Origin Pelvic Care Practitioner Training Program. And this is a 2-year pilgrimage. And I call it a pilgrimage because it is that. It's not just a program where you come and learn, but it's a deep embodied journey of what it is as a woman to be intact to your own body, your own tissues, to explore your own matriarchy and the matriarchal imprints and the arrangement of your own health, to really come into contact with your true form. We explore the coalescing of tissues and beliefs and emotions, and then we get really deep in anatomy. And I know that this work is meant to move through every woman in this program uniquely and differently. And we've talked about this, and I am just the greatest championess of these women. And a huge part of the Origin Pelvic Care Practitioner Training Program is to bring medicine women back to communities, to bring whole woman, whole pelvic care back to communities. And the women in this program are reintegrating this hands-on care, at the thresholds of fertility, of pregnancy loss, of menopause, of birth, of sexuality, of so many places. And I'm just in the great belief that there's no part of womanhood that doesn't need and deserve this care and tending. And I'm highly invested in a world where women in the womb are cared for once more. And we need keepers of this work in every state and every city, and women really moving it through in the way that is most true and most high for their gifts and their people. So the 2025 cohort is enrolling, and we begin in February, and it's just the greatest gift to journey with these women and to do this work. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I'm so excited to see. I mean, it is just so beautiful, like the way that you sort of pay tribute to the women who are in your program. Like I see you on Instagram, just like really just like in these women's court, for lack of a better word. And it's really beautiful to see like how the work is moving through sort of each of the graduates. So and I can speak from experience, the sort of the many faceted prism that is women's care. Like there are so many ways of engaging with this work. There are so many like yeah, just intersections of womanhood that need this tending and this care. And so the possibilities of like how to sort of offer your medicine in this space are endless. I'm still finding mine, I imagine as you are as well. Like it's just, yeah, there's so much here. Beautiful. Well, I would love to just end our chat together. What is your deepest prayer for women, for women's bodies, for pelvic health right now? Beautiful Alexandra.
Oh, babe, I love you so much. Yeah, my deepest prayer in the altar that I continue to move from is the prayer for global womb healing. That as a collective of humanity, we may care for women in the womb once more, and really honoring that when women in the womb are cared for, life is cared for, and it bleeds out into all families, all children, all communities, and all people. So my prayer rests at the origin of life, which is the body of woman. And, in that tandem, I just pray for the heart of our whole earth right
Mm.
now. And I do feel this profound emergence of people living a bit more heart open and eyes open. And I really believe that we as humanity have the opportunity to do some wildly beautiful things in these upcoming years together. And so I'm excited in my reality right now. And it starts with nourishment. It starts with all of us, and we get to bring it forward. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and just your sweet, sweet presence here on the podcast. I just so appreciate you. And yeah, just like all blessings on your work, my dear.
Thank you. And to all the mamas listening, are beautiful. Juliana is going to be sharing a really rich journey for mama's bodies, and I know you'll be sharing that with your people soon, but I've had the high gift of having a little insight peek at it. And as that offering emerges, I know it's going to touch a lot of mamas, and it matters.
Oh, thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for speaking to that. And yes, for all the mamas, there is something really, really juicy on the way, and you will hear about it soon. It's, all that we talked about here together, like how deeply important it is to tend these incredibly powerful intersections of womanhood, and motherhood is one of them. So, more soon on that.
Mm.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, my dear. Talk soon.